All right. Hey, when markets tighten, budgets shrink, and uncertainty rises, most companies retreat. But what if chaos is actually the breeding ground for innovation? Today on the Go for CEO channel, we sit down with David, founder and CEO of Spark Communications, a leader who helps organizations ignite innovation and drive powerful sales results when it matters most. Welcome to the Go for CEO channel, David. How are you?
Good morning, John. I'm great.
Good, good, good. Excited to have you on. Obviously you've got the branding right. You've got it all in back of you and obviously proud of what you've built. So we're gonna, get into that story, get into kind of the background, certainly the things that drove you to, this ideation of Spark Communications, what it all means. We'd love to start with that kind of the background and we'll go from there.
Great. Yeah, it's part of the innovation aspect and part of this whole stretch that I've had over the last 45 years has been the simple fact that my market changed and my industry changed. And I had a choice. I could either retreat, get out of the industry, as many of my colleagues did, or move forward. And so I got into the industry originally as a creative guy in the advertising business. I don't know if you've ever seen the show Mad Men, but the lead
Mm.
character is what I did for a living.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah, so, and in those days, a lot of things were very traditional. Every agency did the same thing. We all charged 15% commission on media and so on. And I went from basically a solo person to creating an agency within about a year and a half of being in business. I had 6 employees, rented a downtown office space, did the usual thing, bought a new car, BMW, of course, because every yuppie had to have a BMW, and bought a new condo, all that sort of thing. And then in 1983 up here, we wound up going through a big recession. The oil and gas industry was what was driving the economy, and things tanked. And so I was left with 6 employees, a large office space I was renting, new condo I was paying for, and the BMW. And I had to change direction. I had to figure out what's next because the commissions were dropping, the agencies were losing their 15%, and the market, and particularly media, was going directly to clients and cutting out the agencies in the middle.
Mm.
So I was in a position where I looked at it and I said, well, this isn't working. My colleagues are all going bankrupt. So what do I do next? And it wound up, I was working with a client who did legal practice management. So that was his gig. And we were working together and he said, I think there's an opportunity for you if you add some services to your business. And that little change led us to dealing with legal firms and accounting practices and professionals and so on. And what happened was the laws changed to allow them for the first time to advertise.
Mm.
So the innovation became we had to go after that market with a different approach. So instead of the advertising agency model, we went with a professional practices model. So where the senior people build at a certain level, the mid-range practitioners build a mid-range practice level, and then the staff were basically part of the billing process. And we operated exactly like a law firm or an accounting practice. So that changed the business altogether. And that led me to build a company of 23 staff and 2 partners within about another year and a half, 2 years. So we went through that whole process of changing how we did business. And of course, the clients we dealt with looked at us and said, well, you're exactly like us. You look like us, you act like us, you build like us. Let's do business. So we ran that business for a while, and my partner decided she wanted the company, and so I asked her to cut me a check, and that's how Spark grew out of that whole situation. What happened in that circumstance was I was going out and doing presentations. So in my business, I do coaching, consulting, and then I do presentations as well. And the presentations led to us attracting clients. So that's how I built the firm quite rapidly. And when I sold my business to my partner and started Spark, I flipped the formula around, used my marketing skills to build a speaking business. And
Hmm.
so that's how things evolved there. And so a lot of times with people who are challenged with changes in the market, you've got to think ahead and figure out what the next best stage is for your business. And sometimes it'll mean a complete revolution of what you're doing. Sometimes it'll mean a slight shift, and other times it's going to mean that you're going to have to stop doing what you do and do something differently. And I think that's the biggest key with the innovation side of things is how do you do that? What process do you go through? So we have a formula, I call it the Spark formula for innovating.
So Spark itself, is it an acronym
It
or
is, yeah,
okay? Share with us what that might be.
yeah. So when it comes to innovation, the first stage is, of course, stimulating thinking. And oftentimes the market will do that for you,
Mm.
as it did for me. Things changed in the market, and I had to think quickly to figure out how to get back on track and increase the business. So that's the first part, is stimulate thinking. The second part is what's the process you need to go through to ideate? In other words, create ideas. And it's a very specific process. And then there's some essential skills that you need for taking action. So, and innovation is different from creativity in that creativity is generating the ideas. Innovation is putting the ideas in practice,
Hmm.
putting it to work. So the third stage is action. And then the fourth stage is what resources do you have? You know, is it internal? You have, or do you have to go external to get resources? And that's things like people, um, money, which you know well about in the whole banking industry, and then the last part is you got to keep innovating. A lot of businesses stop innovating once they've got a new direction, and they don't continue to evolve. And so, in my situation, what happened was, of course, I was doing a lot of live presentations, and when COVID hit, all the live presentations went away. I lost about six presentations in a month and a half.
Mm.
And so I went to an online platform, and that's how my coaching evolved, was to do online seminars and online webinars where people can go in and download information, watch like we're doing here, a webinar. So
So no, that last K is interesting, right? Because I think, over a few hundred interviews I've had, comfort, keep innovating. I love that last one because it's kind of like my book. I talk about action, right? With
yeah,
all the seminars, webinars, attendance, and books that you could read, if you don't take action, ultimately, that's a powerful thing. So that, A for spark in there. But the reality is if you don't keep changing, if you don't keep evolving, if you don't keep thinking, all right, the enemy of greatness they call is comfort, right? Everybody gets
yeah,
comfortable. It sounds like in 1983 you had a comfort level. Everybody was kind of doing the same and having the 15% commission and all these types of things, and all of a sudden, bam! Something hits the marketplace that is a disruptor. Just to go back a little bit, that attorney brought a different type of resource for you, right? That plugged into kind of the business that you already had, and then you found a professional industry that really liked what you did and innovated. So tell us just a little bit backwards, just to go back a little bit. So the day to day of helping those CPAs, attorneys, these types of people, what was the daily function of that, at that point of the business?
oh, for us it was helping clients not only figure out how to communicate what they do to their marketplace, but the key there also was how do they differentiate themselves? So the word positioning is a common used phrase in that how do businesses stand alone in a market that's saturated with people that do exactly what you do?
Hmm.
And so what we had to do with the law practices was look at everything from their branding to the clients they serve to how they actually did business and communicated the message to the people that they needed to reach. And so our part of that whole formula as an advertising firm or marketing firm at that time was to help them do that and go through the process. And then, of course, my client who led me into that direction his job was to help lawyers with practice management in how do they become more efficient? How do they manage to, bill more as lawyers do? And so it was one of those situations where the combination of the two of us working together, along with my team at the agency, made a difference in the market because nobody else was doing that. And then the last component of that whole formula, which helped us succeed, was we had all of the services internally. Because prior to that, the world of the advertising agency, everything was farmed out. If you needed PR, you hired a PR firm. If you needed graphic design, you hired a graphic design team. So everything was farmed out from the agency. We had everything internal.
Hmm. It's interesting because my wife works in that space. She's on the legal side. It's called resources for Publicis. Publicis is a worldwide advertising company, and
Yes,
I know that their journey has been, gobbling up small, medium-sized, enterprise type businesses, and they're a behemoth in the world now. And it's interesting, right? Like when you've been able to build a brand or build a company that then services kind of every angle of what that client could be. Sometimes some people say, and they've been on the channel and said, hey, a singular focus, a very niche industry. I think, and that helps a ton when you're a small, medium business. But when you want to really grow and have, different verticals that can help a client, it adds a lot more revenue, and you just need the right leadership in each one of those components. I'm sure. So, all right. So, you get to a point where your partner says, hey, I'd like to kind of part ways. Maybe she had a different vision, I'm assuming, and you had a certain way of looking at things as well. And that happens in partnerships. So you mentioned
absolutely.
she paid you. So it was more, she wanted to take your equity out of that business and bring it onto her, end so that she could own. Was she looking to own 100% of the business?
Yeah, she was.
Okay.
Basically, her comment in our discussion was that she wanted her name at the top of the masthead,
Mhm. Okay.
and
So
I
a
was the
little
guy
bit
that
of
started.
ego got in there.
I started the company, and I built it up, and brought her and one other partner on board, and so it was. It was a challenge, and I looked at it and I said, "Well, I'm doing more speaking now, and maybe there's an opportunity to grow that business." Plus, I was also working with coaching CEOs, CFOs in companies in the public space market. So private companies and public space companies that were looking for shareholders and selling shares. I worked with them to do speech coaching, and also to help develop their resources they use when they did presentations. So,
Mm.
in some cases PowerPoint, in many cases it was a multimedia program that we developed for them. And so that was another growth area for me. And then I got involved in starting up a professional speakers association. So I wound up working with speakers to develop their presentation materials and marketing materials. So there was a brand new growth uh, focus for Spark.
Nate. And well, again, just to take it back, because I love the interesting peeling of the onion, right? Since 1983, you've been in this industry, you've really innovated, you've transitioned, you've paradigm shift. I mean, there are these things that take for longevity to stay in an industry, you have to do these things, right? So it's always an interesting story, especially in the American business world, where many businesses don't last, one generation, right? Unfortunately, I always talk about Japan having a 500, a 700-year-old business because their lineage thinks, okay, hey, the next one takes over, the next one takes over. It's a little bit different here in the United States. We tend to look for the exit, the large sum of money that takes us on to the voyage, right? So, all right, so in that scenario, I guess it sounds like you started kind of creating a different vertical within the current business that you had. Was it still something that streamed all revenue through one entity, or did you form Spark, or Spark was formed only once you got out of the entity that you were paid off?
Oh, yeah, it was a brand new, fresh start
Okay.
for me.
Yeah.
And what was interesting about it as well, in doing what I did and changing the direction of the company slightly, um, I attracted clients who wanted to partner with me.
Oh, okay.
So, one of the first companies I started, I had a client that I'd met back in '89 who was in the wine industry. And in Alberta, where I'm from, the market changed for the wine industry and they privatized. So that meant anybody who was a licensed agent could bring wine into the province and sell it. And so my partner approached me about working with them to develop marketing for wineries and bring products in from the international market. So we partnered up. He wasn't part of my company, but we worked together to attract that whole vertical of an industry. And then from there, he went back to the export side internationally. And he said, look, I've got to get my products into Alberta, and we don't have an agent there. Would you be interested in starting up an import agency? So he spun off a company to do that and started bringing wine into the market here.
Mm.
Um, and then I had another client of mine who was in the real estate industry, decided to leave Alberta and go to Central America because properties in Central America were selling, and a lot of people wanted recreational retirement properties. So he approached me about helping promote properties in Central America. And I'd spent the early part of my career working with builders, developers, realtors, and that as clients. So we got together and we formed a company that helped us attract investors and buyers of properties in Central America. So we grew that company up as another vertical and a separate company from Spark Communications. And my job in that industry was basically to do presentations to talk to people that might be interested in buying properties or even investing in a project in Central America. So
Hmm.
again, it's that innovation thing, looking for opportunities and working with people who have an idea but don't quite know how to take it to market or don't have the skill sets that perhaps I come to the table with.
To me, your story seems to share you had a competency that you were really developed in, right? In this marketing, branding, understanding, advertising of something. And then you were able to hop from one industry to the other and have that expertise, right? Really, an agency does that, right? It brings in different industries. It
Oh,
may
absolutely.
initially have a niche in a certain industry because I know a good friend of mine, he just recently went from a marketing agency just broadly to just roofing. And that's all
Oh,
he's doing. He actually changed the name of his brand from Tag Media to, I forgot what that is, but it's like Roof something media, right? Or something like that. And it's interesting because I talked to him just personally off the podcast and say, hey, why'd you make that decision? And he said, hey, this industry is really booming. I see an opportunity. I'm going to niche in to this area. But, I love that you had a broad perspective, right? And I feel like that seems like, when you don't know that you're going to be a doctor, a lawyer, an engineer, something specific, you develop a core competency, and then that is the value that the marketplace really enjoys, right?
yeah, exactly. And one of the things that when I work with clients and do presentations around the whole innovation aspect of things is a key component in what we do in the marketing world is observation. Look at what's
Mm.
going on. How can you adapt it to what you're doing with your clients? Or how do you need to change your business to reach those clients that you need to reach? So that's the first part. And then what's the connection between what other businesses are doing or other industries are doing? And how can you bring that into the fold of what you're doing for a client? So
Mm.
sometimes it's putting two what we call divergent ideas together to create a third idea.
I love it. No, that's really, and look, Go for SEO community, there's so much in that thought pattern, right? And that way of thinking and understanding kind of how you could take any industry and anything that you're doing, but really center in on that core competence, the value that you bring to the marketplace, and then be able to diversify, right? Diverge into different areas and bring that growth right out of it. So, all right, look, you also mentioned 6 employees. Then you kind of joint ventured and teamed up with, the lady that then ultimately you left. and then you went up to 23 employees. I love talking about leadership, and we always like to learn. In that scalability cycle, what were some things that you learned about yourself and about, what talent you brought onto the organization to make sure that you started to run a business instead of just having a sole proprietorship, right? And where you did everything. You actually ran a business because you had employees, you had payroll, you have these things, these leaders in front of you. So a little bit of that story, if you don't mind.
Oh, sure. One of the things happened when I first started, and then the big recession hit in '83, is I said to myself, okay, it's one thing to have a skill or a talent or an ability in a market, but the second part is there's a whole different world of running a business. So I literally went on a learning curve to figure out everything from finance to managing employees to build customer relationships to that whole aspect of things of running a business. And it wound up, it led me to actually getting into the speaking business because I realized there's a whole bunch of businesses out there that didn't know anything about actually running a business. They may have had a talent or a skill, but knew nothing about business. So I started doing business training. And out of that led to me realizing that in the process of developing the business, that you had to start to become a leader. And when I grew the company to 23 people, I realized that in that situation, I had to let go. Because one of the biggest things for me was I liked to control how things went. And I realized with 23 people, that's just not going to happen. So I had to learn things like trust. I had to trust my employees. I had to learn things like managing skill sets and delegation, being able to lead a team and keep them on track, because that was one of the biggest things that having a creative department in an agency, and your wife probably knows this, it's like herding cats. So it was always a challenge to try and keep things on time, on budget, make sure that everybody's working well. And so, from that perspective, and especially in the last few years now, I've built a number of organizations, different companies I mentioned. I've also built a couple of professional associations. And from a leadership perspective, I learned a lot simply
Mm.
because I had to figure out how to lead people, particularly in not for profit organizations like the two associations were. I had to learn to lead people even though they weren't getting paid. And so, I mean, when you got employees and you're paying them, you can tell them what to do and they'll usually follow along. In a leadership organization or in a situation where you're leading not for profits, it's very hard to get people to stay on track because you can't tell them you're going to get fired. So,
Yeah,
so
the
it's yeah, and in the last little while now, what's happened for me is I'm actually looking at moving a little bit more into the leadership training aspect, leadership speaking business, and coaching clients in leadership because it seems now, especially in the marketing game, there are so many companies out there starting up, particularly in the digital space. And I'm looking at that and I'm thinking, okay, the problem for most clients now is how do they lead their team of people and how do they communicate what they're doing in an effective way? And so that's that whole direction towards leadership.
it drives me to think about inspect what you expect, right? It's and it's a component of a managerial leader, right? But leader, right? The one that's out there in the marketplace, show coaching, those types of things, integrated with their people and those types of things. It's interesting the kind of the dynamic, especially I have a lot of people that have a pretty big workforce and it's all remote. And what a
Yes.
change over the last 5, 10 years, especially with the pandemic now, having that capability. But then where's the synergy? Where's the culture? Where are the things that are, tying people together? Sure, it's neat to have that freedom that they're not having to drive into an office for 45 minutes and 45 minutes back or an hour back and losing 2 hours of their life. But it's interesting of that dynamic. So I'm very curious about what you'll come up with over the next 18 to 24 months because It is. It's a new way of building a business, but you still need the leadership to be able to focus the team and where's the why, right? Is the culture, is the vision, similarly put together, and can you have trust that people will do the work, and that's where you inspect what you expect, right? So
Yeah,
uh, it
definitely.
it's
Well,
interesting.
and not many people can be self-leading, if you want to call it that.
Hmm.
In other words, they're sitting at home, but they get distracted by the TV, they get distracted by the kids, they go to the fridge, and they're not staying on track. And so, as a senior leader, CEO of a company or department head, and so on, the hard part is being able to trust that they're going to do what they said they're going to do. And then, like you say, inspect what they're doing and make sure they're staying on track. And being remote, one of the things that's missing is that camaraderie that you get around the cooler in the office when people are just connecting with each other and sharing their life, sharing their ambitions, sharing their role in what they're doing, and learning. And one of the things I talk about when it comes to innovation as well is that Apple had a great concept, and they still use it today, which was that every person in the company would go to a different department and observe and maybe even work with that department to understand what went on in that division. And the key with that was then they could go back to their role and they understood where their place was in the process of developing a product or a service.
Mm.
And so they learn from observing, they learn from working with a different team of people, and they may even come up with some very innovative ideas simply because they've observed something and they go, hey, never even thought of that. And you lose all that when it comes to people working remotely, unless those people are continually in communication via Zoom or some sort of conferencing approach. So that's the challenge as well in businesses. They lose that ability to be able to understand what other people are doing and connect it to what they're doing because they're working in a silo.
Yeah. Well, and talents become worldwide, right? It's not just your community or maybe 5, 10 miles away from where your office is at. It's, hey, you could be in Chicago and work with someone in Alberta, Canada, right? Like you could be
Yeah,
in
look at us.
Chicago and someone in Brazil, shows up. I know for this, I just contacted a lady that was referred to me out of Venezuela that's doing some editing that I want them to do just to kind of up the level of the game that we're processing as a YouTube channel and hopefully what we're turning into is a media company and all that stuff. So, but it's interesting, right? It's innovative to be able to work in those things, but boy, directing them and having some framework for them, it's kind of like an intern, right? An intern comes in, they don't know what to do. So if you just, oh, hey, file these things, it's like, okay, well, are they filing them in the correct order? Back in the day, right? A file cabinet, you open up a thing and it should have some tabs and a sequence to it. It's in a similar way, right? Nothing really changes. It's just the way that it adapts, right? It seems like, and then obviously innovation comes in, but so we've talked about the transformation of your first business into the partnership. We've talked about you kind of seeing a developing market in the coaching and obviously speaking side of things, and then obviously you were attracted to different industries based on the competency that you had, and then you just shared with us a little bit of the leadership. So operationally, throughout the years, what have you thought has really helped you to continue to be in business from an operational standpoint? Because look, we all need sales. We need that revenue to come in to stay in business. But they always say the lights are the revenue and the sales and the hard work sometimes is in the back end. Did you see yourself since you are tending to be the figurehead of the business and you like to speak in these things? How did you set up your operations throughout the years, and did you learn anything on tweaking that?
Oh, I think the thing that I learned the most was that it's very difficult to be a one-man band. It's very
Mm.
difficult to do everything yourself. And when I started hiring people, I remember when I had the 6-person company, my secretary came in and she said, "We need to meet in the boardroom." And I'm thinking, oh, this doesn't sound good. So she pulled all the employees and me into the boardroom. And the first words out of her mouth is she said, "Do you trust us?" And I said, "Yeah, well, that's why I hired you." And she says, "No, do you trust us?" And I said, "Well, yeah, I do." And she said, "Well, then why aren't you sharing some of the work with us? Because we're sitting around waiting for things to do while you're working all night and day and sometimes coming in at 4 in the morning." And she said, "So it doesn't sound like you trust us." So I started to realize that I wanted control and I was afraid of failing. But part of innovation is do something, try it. If you fail, fail forward and get back on track.
Mm.
And so I started delegating more. And then, of course, what happened is I went the other way and I started passing everything off to staff. And some of them got a little overwhelmed. And then I realized at that point as well is that as a manager, it's not our job to control the work. It's not our job to do the work. It's our job to act as a sounding board as things are moving along and be
Mm.
able to make suggestions, help out where we can, but let the employee or the individual that's in the company doing the work do the work. And then be a good communicator, be a good director, and then leave it alone. And so that
Yeah.
was the second stage. And then when I built it up to 23 people, one of the other things I realized is that there's kind of a magic point of being a 10-person company. And then there's a magic point of being a 20-person company. A 10-person company, you have to have a manager. If you're the CEO, you have to have somebody that manages, whether it's the office or manages different departments and so on. At 20 people, you've got to start dividing the company into sections or areas of focus and specialty and have somebody that can manage that in each department. Because as things grow, just the sheer volume of paperwork and communications and time it takes to manage 23 people. There was times I said to my colleagues in the industry, I said, sometimes I feel like I'm a full-time babysitter and a part-time creative director. So so I think the key there is learning how to manage people, learning how to encourage people. I mean, there's times when we would go out and do as many as 5 agency pitches to get clients in a week, and there was burnout happening. Not only from my perspective or my partners, but the whole team was burned out. And if you lose the pitch, it's kind of like a sports team, like you were talking earlier about your daughter and the team challenging the number one team in the market. Well, for us, we lost an agency pitch. People felt like a failure. The team
Mm.
felt like a failure. So you had to do a little bit of rah rah and get people back on track because there was another pitch coming up. So it's just
You
like a
know,
game.
it 100% is right. And business is war, business is game, business is life. It's like, that's why I love it. I mean, I think it's in my blood. My uncle in South America, I talk about in my book, was kind of the first vision that I had because my mom was more clerical, worked for a city college, and my adopted dad was just, iron worker. And the business sense, the understanding that it was, it's this game that you go to every day and you play and you're a participant on the field of life, right? Of business. So I've always loved it. I will say it made me get a mental analogy of a steering wheel, right? We all
Yeah,
drive and we understand that it's literally like a little touch, a little tweak, and a little touch, a little tweak. I forgot what the Google statistic is, but I think we make different changes while we drive like 1,000 times. If you go 5 miles, you can go 100 times of just little tweaks, right? So, uh,
absolutely. Yeah.
reminds you of business. Unless you have a perfectly aligned car, you're definitely not always going straight. You're having to tweak a little bit in between the lines. So, it's awesome
Isn't that
stuff.
true?
What's that?
Isn't that true? Yeah,
Yeah,
very. Uh, well, I was
yeah, and
I was
like,
very fortunate growing up in that my dad was an architect. He's passed away now, but he was an architect, and so I'd oftentimes wind up in the office with them, and I learned about architecture and did things like drafting, for instance, in the office. And so, in many ways, I probably intuitively learned some business skills.
Hmm.
So I was very fortunate that way because many people get into business, they wind up in business because they got fired or they decided to quit, and so I had some skill sets there. I think that I maybe observed, never knew that I'd learned those skills.
Yeah, yeah. I mean, look, part of the growth and, there's educational piece, right? If you go to school and you go that route, there's the entrepreneurial side where maybe it's a mix of education that learned out of a book, but then you put into practice, right? And ultimately, we talked about it earlier, right? Without action in spark, nothing really gets done, right? So, and then I love the K, right? Keep innovating, keep changing, keep evolving, because comfort is the enemy of greatness. So awesome, awesome.
Absolutely.
Well, look, as we end our interviews, we typically go through CEO, right? And talking about Spark and what you've done over the years and really challenging now the marketplace with what you're doing with coaching and the speaking side of things and going into these companies. When you think about client experience and what Spark Communications has done out in the marketplace, if you take it to like 60 seconds value proposition, what does it mean to do business from a value prop with Spark Communications?
Oh, I think the feedback I've always gotten from clients and why they value working with me is because I can quickly understand what they're looking to do, and I listen to what they're telling me, and then I not only look at, okay, what direction are they going, what do they need to do, but I look for the gaps. And so I'm able to quickly innovate what they're doing and create a result for them. So the fellow that I worked with that was doing practice management for lawyers, it was interesting. I said, so why did you hire me? Or why did you decide to work with me? And he says, well, I surveyed the market. I talked to your competition. I talked to your clients. I talked to people who aren't your clients. And he said, everyone said the same thing. And he said, I said, what was that? And he said, well, he said that the comment was that you were a creative guy who understood business. And so I said, well, that's interesting because I had to agree with him. There's a lot of people in the ad industry, especially, are great creative people that have no sense of business. And so that was one of the things that I think always stuck in my mind, and I've made a purposeful move towards understanding how business operates, what's affecting business now, and where it's going.
I love it. It's interesting. In a selfish way, I'll comment, there's hundreds of bankers, commercial bankers out there, especially in Chicago. We have tons of banks, tons of opportunity for a client. And the thing I lead with is that I've been in your shoes. I've owned a business up to 3.5 million in revenue. I sold it in '09, so I had an exit. I get how it is to get to a seven-figure number, which is only 9% of businesses in America, by the way,
Oh,
that get
wow.
to seven figures. So it's a real stat. And it's interesting, right? The differentiator for me has been also I created this podcast and have interviewed 400 CEOs, founders of companies. So my mind is just file cabinets of just wisdom and knowledge and things. And it's so cool. And you have to express that, right? And have a conviction and be the most convinced in that conversation that you could give that value and express that and do something. So obviously with that interview that the gentleman did of all these different areas, every one of those people, gave him the same feedback. So kudos to you for being so consistent on the way that you've delivered in your life. So awesome,
Oh,
awesome. So
thanks.
E is for engagement and CEO, okay? And we always are interested in, you know, how does David interact? Does he like to break bread and go to dinners? Does he like to have, his team come in for a retreat? What are the best ways and most impactful ways that you've seen of people engaging with you and you love to be energized by that engagement?
Oh, yeah, that's an interesting one. I think from my perspective, and going into the speaking business was at first something that I'd never planned on doing. I wound up going into the speaking business because I said to myself, I've got to learn about presentations and be able to deliver every time I go in to pitch an ad campaign or talk to CEOs of companies, etc. And so I went from being more of an introverted person to being an extrovert because I had to be as a speaker. And then through the training process, what I always enjoyed from an engagement perspective was that when I worked with people and did training, was to see the behavior change at the end of the session or at the end of a presentation. So watch people transform because they've got a new skill set. Watch them transform because they now have a different belief system. And for me, that was the key. And so with clients, what I always have enjoyed from an engagement perspective is a client who says, okay, I'm giving you this project. I trust you're going to come out with the idea. And at the end, they're happy because not only they achieved what they needed to do, but the process of getting there, working with me, was an enjoyable process. And so they were engaged all the way along.
Nate. Okay. So, and on a personal sense, what do you are you a do you like to just spend time doing like going to events? Are you a dinner person? Just to kind of get a little bit personal.
Oh, absolutely. I like networking. I enjoy getting out with other people who are in business and talk to them over dinner. I'm also something you may not know from our previous conversation. I'm also a professional musician, so I go out to jams from, on a regular basis and play some rock and roll, so to speak. And so that's an important part of my life. I also ride motorcycles, so that's an enjoyable aspect. Getting out with a few friends, going for a ride, sitting down and having a burger and just chatting about life. And I have to say that from the perspective of learning speaking and learning how to present, that's changed how I look at life and how I communicate with other people and connect with other people. Because prior to that, like I said, I was very introverted and I really didn't connect with a lot of people.
Yeah, no, I mean there's things and modalities that you learn, right? And things that kind of grow and evolve. And you can be introvert, extrovert. You know, I think all of us kind of adapt into each other. There's a lot of introverts that I've interviewed that said, "Hey, I'm an introvert, but man, I'm here on this podcast. I'm out in the marketplace. I'm marketing my business, right?" So that's the extrovert side of things. But you know, there's
Absolutely.
a sense of adaptability in each one of those labels, I guess, that we put on each other, right? So the last one is operational excellence and talking about, the businesses that you've had throughout the years, the 6 employees, the 23 employees, the learning the leadership, all these things, there's operations in back of it, tools that you're using right now. What would you say are the top two, three tools? And it could be AI, it could be something. What are some things that keep you in line, right, with your day-to-day business from an operational standpoint?
Oh, I have to say that the implementation of AI has been a godsend as far as organizing and being able to develop thought processes or at least find ways of getting information quicker, organizing it easier. So I think that's really critical. I also think having basically a process of tasking projects out and being able to keep on track with the tasks. So there's a number of different ways of being able to do that. One of the products out there is something like Asana, where you can put things into a timeline and you can organize it as projects. And so I think that's important. And then the third part as well is being able to just organize a calendar to be able to not only get things done, but be able to keep in touch with people that you need to follow up with, especially in sales. I mean, that's, I think, one of the biggest challenges for most businesses is we get leads, we find contacts that we want to talk to, and then we lose track and we forget to follow up. And so being able to calendar that and say, okay, I'm going to get back to this person in so many days or a week or whatever time frame. And then I think just the big picture. One of the things I use for organizing when I'm trying to figure out a speech or whether I'm figuring out a project is I use a mind map, which is a great tool for organizing. So Edward de Bono is the guy that developed that many, many years ago. And it's a concept of being able to just quickly jot down ideas and then organize later. So that's a great way of planning and organizing, at least initially on something you're doing.
Well, I appreciate you sharing that with the community. I mean, it's always neat to kind of see a perspective of what are the tools, right? What are the things that you're using? And obviously, you went through the CEO, acronym that we do with client experience, engagement, and operational excellence. So, David, how do people get a hold of you? What's the best way to engage with you? They see this interview and they're like, "Hey, we really want to bring David out to either speak or give us some guidance on what he does and specializes in and with Spark." So, what's the best way to do that?
Well, they can reach me through our website, sparkcommunications.com. They can email me at dsaxby@sparkcommunications.com. They can phone me 403-585-9870.
Awesome, my friend. Well, hey, look, it's been a pleasure having you on and super excited for people to enjoy this episode and see that. Ladies and gentlemen, if you haven't subscribed to the channel, go ahead and subscribe to the channel. Also, by the way, in October of 2025, just a short few months ago, I came out with a book called The 4A Formula. It's a framework, right? It's a process, right? It's how to untangle challenges and think like a CEO from the many, many, many interviews like the Davids of the world that I've had on to my own experiences, to playing soccer, to being in love, all that type of stuff, and taking a formula of assessing where you're at, alignment with the right people and values, taking accountability, and taking massive action. So check it out on Amazon. And David, thanks again for being on the Go for CEO channel. We appreciate it.
Thanks, John. It's been a pleasure. Look forward to continuing the conversation.